we take back from them our emotional stuff. We can give them as a gift our resilience, our consistency, our reliability, and our sense of value. But until we do the work on ourselves, we're going to keep seeing the patterns that we denied in our future generations. Welcome to the Candid Conversation Show. I'm your host, Marilyn Fontaine, artist and creative coach for women who want success and income with ease. Welcome to the Candid Conversations. This is your host, Marilyn Fontaine, and this is episode 13. Episode 13. I might be wrong. God help me. But in this week's episode, we're going to drop into part 2 of Generation X, Baby Boomers, Generation X, now what? And in this segment, we're going to cover all about the Generation X people, which is my generation. There's so many. Generation X, Baby Boomers, Millennials, Gen Z, or Z, depends on where you're listening to this from. But today we're going to talk about Generation X and how millennials can help us navigate life as it is. So last week I covered the reasons why a lot of Generation X, baby boomers, were held back in what they were doing in later life because of the lack of personal inquiry and coming from a generation where people just put up and just got on with it. And in our current life that we have now, we are constantly looking at the things that went wrong in yesteryear and from generations. So it's an information age, and we're looking at what things didn't work for us emotionally as people that we're in a new millennial and things didn't work for us before, and we are kind of trying to correct the mistakes of the people that came before us. Could be our parents, our caregivers, our ancestors, and we have enough time, don't we, to be doing all of that, because that's just how we live. Anyway, so I'm gonna go on and be focused because I'm getting distracted. But before I start with this Generation X and all the other, I want to shout out to my client. I'll call her, who's just done a wonderful things and have got what she wanted. Like, it's been really, really exciting. We've done, we've really gone for a lot with her coaching, and she's been incredibly brave. But despite the times when she wasn't sure how things were going to turn out, things right now have turned out in her favor. And I just want to send her lots of praise and love, because I think that, to embark on a coaching relationship, it's a level of trust. Yes, she's worked with me before, but, it's a huge emotional commitment to trust somebody with your future. And the reason why I say that with a pause is that really coaching isn't trusting somebody with your future. It's trusting yourself. And so client A, well done. You've actually manifested a job that you want to be doing, as well as starting your own or restarting your own business in the way that you want to. And that is the beauty of investing in yourself. Has the Gen X. She's a Gen X person. Or is she a baby boomer? Let me just see. So, Gen X they followed the baby boomers, and they come before millennials. So from 1965 to 1980, you're defined as Gen X, which is me, which is my client, which is, I'd say, I feel I've got a 50-50 split of Gen X. No, 50-20-30 split of Gen X, baby boomers, and millennials. That's what I've got. I've got a split of that. So 10% is millennials, 20% is I would say baby boomers, and the rest is Gen X. So they was classically termed as the latchkey kids, because that's when the parents were going out to work. So the workforce had increased from the 1960s right to the 1980s, and also because of the sexual revolution, because of the advancement of the contraceptive pill, more women, and also women's rights, feminism, more women was able to leave their home and work, and the divorce rates increased because women weren't just sitting back and thinking of England, and some people just had kids because they wanted to. So it was no longer a stigma to be a single parent. We saw the rise of this, and it peaked in the 80s, 1980s. Okay. And again, the sexual revolution, self-actualization, people are starting to learn about themselves. And this is when we had popular psychology that became high onto the, became commonplace. We also had, Generation X, MTV generation. Like, we were the MTV generation where, we had music videos started to come in. We also had, really, so I would say it's a bit like if you're not into woo and spirituality, a bit like a spiritual time, because it's where we found tribes, not in our own people, but with our groups. So, in the 40s, you had the Teddy Boys and the ska person. But when we started to go into the 80s, you had like punk, heavy metal, new romantics. I was a rude girl and a new romantic and a so-called mod for a short time before I went into reggae and dub and all those things. But, grunge, hardcore, acid, all these different things that started to come within this time. So I think it was the time when music and genres reached a peak, and a peak that I hadn't seen before. And also with more and more people of color, Black people, brown-bodied, Black-bodied people, they were able to have some rights to programs and culture. We had hip-hop, we had soul, we had disco. All these things changed the whole culture, and everybody started to be banded by the music they liked. I spoke about the birth control, and so it was more about adults. It was about people just moving forward and being their self. And again, we had the rise of civil rights. So that was really important, more rights for Black workers, and more factory work. So you had increase of factory work, and so people were getting more and more involved. Again, we had the rise of the .com. So we had, the computer, the VDU, visual display units, all those things that were happening. Like, we started to go into a technological age. And also, there was a lot of entrepreneurship. Remember in the 80s when, I remember being a fashion student in the 80s, and you had like Camden Market, and everybody had a small business, even if they were doing clothes or events or something. Everybody in those days, you could just rock up to a market, give somebody some money, and start selling what you needed to. And so it was a really good time for that, you know. So it was a really big time for people to have their own business. And also, again, when you had the contraceptive pill, women weren't getting pregnant, or if they did, you know, the abortion rates rised as well. They were able to still build a business longer than if they just got pregnant and had an absence of these things. I'm neutral about everything. And it's really funny. It says Generation X are far more likely to have children born out of wedlock than their parents, which we know. And there was more children being born out of wedlock during these times. And, you know, again, people had more freedom in terms of things that they could do. You know, there was a lot of also people that did cash in hand work, especially like single mothers would work in a pub or in a club or work in a laundry. So there wasn't this whole trace of money. And people still, I know people that still had a business, still claimed their dole, or would go away, claim their dole and get their money. You know, it was really kind of loose. When we had the recession, and then this is where things started to happen, where we had a recession and the Generation X from 2007 to 2010 felt the impact of this economy because a lot of the money declined. And remember, a lot of people from Generation X bought their property. If you didn't buy your property as a baby boomer like my parents did, before 1960 or something. My mum and dad bought their house for like 7,000 in the 60s before I was born. But in Generation X, a lot of them worked really hard to get a mortgage. And then they had a lot of like negative equity. So a lot of people lose their homes and start again. But obviously now in 2023, a lot of Gen and Gen X's actually have paid off those homes and they're reaping the benefits. But they've not forgotten what it felt like to have negative equity. And so you saw a lot of people that had homes doing 2 or 3 jobs just to get by. So it was quite difficult times. And I think that impacted on them. And post, you know, after the COVID pandemic, what you found was a lot of Generation X people were looking after children and parents. So whereas the baby boomers, you know, they were looking after parents, they didn't have, their children were still young, so it was still a beginning of something, whereas obviously Gen X had more money, but they still had to look after parents. So the emotional pressure was still very hard. And so, and again, they were busy looking after themselves. So this is the background of Generation X, of what things happened during that time, you know, what happened during that time. But I want to talk about emotional impact. So you had Gen X's who successfully raised their children and their children went to university, or maybe they got a job, but Gen X's managed to keep a home, whether it was renting, council, private rent or mortgage, they managed to keep a home, some savings, they built up a pension pot. A lot of them are going to inherit their parents' homes because they're the direct people that came after their baby boomer parents. So they have a property back home. Here's the thing, because Generation X's look good, they've managed to retire, their children have grown up. Again, they were raised by parents who didn't know any different, or if they did know any different, they didn't want to do anything about it. And they never really sought to change what was going on for them emotionally. So now you have Generation X's who are got more money, or they may have emotional responsibility, or they're in between. So they're still fit enough to work, but they're emotionally tired. because they've gone through this whole life of either raising children or having all these like so many different careers. They've seen a change in the status quo. You know, they may have been single parents, may have been married and divorced because, again, they've been brought up in a time where you didn't have to just put up and shut up. So they've made choices about their life, but they still haven't worked on their emotions, their mind, their mindset. So they are the in-betweeners because they know better, more better than their parents, or the baby boomers. But some of them are tired and stuck because they've not had they've been, they grew up, my generation, if you haven't done the internal work, you've grown up in a time where you could just say, well, this is not working, I'm just going to the next thing. So you're almost like, it's not too hot, not too cold. It's almost like I know total freedom and I know total restriction. And having all those opportunities to hand in the past makes life difficult because if something doesn't work, you can go. You know that sometimes the discipline is needed, but with discipline, sometimes you've had evidence of your parents with too much discipline and not enough life. And so because a lot of Gen Xers know that life can be so liberating, they don't have to make a commitment, and they feel that they don't have to go through the pain of that total discipline. So this is how it will show up. It will show up in either being very good at what you do with work, saving, creating a nest egg, but not developing relationships. Because relationships are too hard and I'm just going to give up. I'm just going to let go of it. I'm not going to try, or I'm not going to go through the difficult parts. I'm going to hide and I'm not going to acknowledge it's difficult, and I'm just going to ignore that relationships are difficult. And so I live a half life rather than dealing with the relationship problems that I have, because I grew up in a society where we could do anything we wanted. There was possibility. But life doesn't give you that anymore when you get to a certain age, because there is some rules that one has to follow if one has to have a certain standard of living. And so we become free. We don't commit because commitment could be entrapment, because there's not a lot of good men, not a lot of good women. And so we don't commit. So we never go, a lot of Gen Xers never go through that difficult period again because they know what it feels like. So they don't surrender to that difficult period that they may have to go through, which is part of the hero's journey. And that could look like having to go to counseling. It could look like going to relate. It could look like going to Codependence Anonymous or Spenders Anonymous. Generation X has a type of pain aversion. So they'll go through pain if pushed, and they'll be very resilient. But a lot of the times they won't consider it because they know what it feels like. And I think with the baby boomers, they had no choice but to be miserable and go through that difficulty because that's all they know. And they weren't taught to put themselves first. But Gen X's, knowledge is power, but also ignorance is bliss. And we've seen too much. We can't unsee, and we can't unfeel, we can't unknow. And so I feel that is the problem with Generation X people, is that because we know how to hide, we know how to be free, and we know what restriction feels like. Like we have it all. We've been through it all. So we are like the bridge between the millennials and the baby boomers, because we know what all feels like on some level. But some Gen X's have experience just coming from a single parent family and not knowing any different. However, there are another lot of generation X come from a single parent family and they've made a two-parent family under the odds, and they've made it work. And this is not about whether a one-parent family or two-parent family works. It's not that. It's just about our choices and how we slide from one place to another, because we don't repeat our parents' patterns. What I tend to see, even myself as a Generation X, I'm seeing a sense of aloneness after the children have gone, and a feeling of not belonging anywhere. Because one thing about millennials, some of them may not feel they belong economically anywhere, but they they still have time, because they're in a stage of they're, you know, I don't know, their 30s or something, late 20s, 30s, I can't remember the generation, but they still have time and they've got our experiences to learn from. But with us, we've got the condition of time. You know, we've got a certain amount, we've got more years behind than in front, they say. And so we start telling ourselves, oh, I don't know what's going on. I feel that I'm young, but all these things are coming up. But actually, when we look to the millennials that are constantly looking about their anxiety, their traumas, and they're really unpacking, they're doing the work that our generation still is not doing. And so when I hear Generation X saying, oh, my children, you know, they've got so much emotional problems, they're so sensitive. Well, they're only coming with the stuff that you are rejecting. What you reject, you project. And so our millennial children, our millennial family members and members of our society are actually, they're doing the work for us that we're not doing. And so the way we can use their work on their self is to look at how and what are they trying to break. What curses are they breaking? If you want to know what's going on in your family, look at what the millennials are working through. If it's self-worth, relationship, sense of belonging, have a closer look in the mirror and you'll see that in yourself. And so all the things we talk about with our millennials, how they are, you know, they are, what's that word? They are self-centered, narcissistic. You know, it's all about them. Those are the things that we've denied in ourselves, and we've become all about the other. And they are the mirror generation, because we, as far as I'm concerned, the Gen X had everything. I'm sorry, we had the best of the best. We may not actually take that back. We may not have the technology to work from home and all those things that the millennials got, and you know, the freedom to do things online and to create businesses online. But when you talk about popular culture, and when you talk about the most influential people of our time, baby boomers and Gen X, I'm sorry, that was the time. You know, so we saw more in that time than ever before, in my opinion. And so, because we see too much, we know too much, for us to leave a stamp and to make this, you know, our life great and what we can contribute, I think it's really important that we take that navel gazing of the millennials, and we take that constantly inquiring and asking to be respected, which is what the millennials do. Asking to be seen, asking for our rights. And when we take that back from them, the things that we complain that they don't do, as opposed to not having initiative or being lazy or being too familiar, all those things, when we take back from them our emotional stuff, we can give them as a gift our resilience, our consistency, our reliability, and our sense of value. But until we do the work on ourselves, we're going to keep seeing the patterns that we denied in our future generations. And I leave this podcast here because I think let those words resonate inside you. Like, subscribe, and share this podcast. This is Marilyn Fontaine signing off. You want to be part of an incubator of some amazing creative women, then you need to join the highly capable creative one-to-one program with me. To join, you can just contact me at www.mjfontaine.co.uk and book a sales call with me to join this amazing 6-month program where we get to work on your creative business. We also get to work clearing your blocks and also bringing that confidence up to 100 so you can stand in your agency and live your best life.